Hello, and welcome to The Art of Growth. This is Jim Zartman, and today Joel Hubbard and I are completing this series of 3 podcasts where we did one on connection with self and connection through others, and this is connection to others. We've been focusing on connection this year, but these 3 are based on some of the things that we've been learning and conversations we've been having with listeners and clients around this topic of connection. Before we jump in, if you are new here, go to theartofgrowth.org to sign up for a newsletter so you know what's going on, including a new certification course that starts next week. This is for people who really want to go deep with the Enneagram. They want to go all in. Some do it as a form of self-exploration, some because they would like it to be part of their work life. But regardless, it's the last chance to sign up for this round. But if you're interested in any of our work, if you're interested in having us come in and work with your company, you'd like to take a look at our blogs, or even get a little mug or something, you can do that at theartofgrowth.org. But for now, let's jump into connection to others.
So we talked about connection with self, connection through others, and the direction of that is towards us. It's the receptivity framework. Today, we're talking about connection to others. But to bridge that, I wanted to talk about how the receptivity to what others bring to us is in multi-dimensional ways. So you have receptivity that comes from affirmation, and we struggle many times with that. We have it in some feedback, maybe critical feedback. And then there's the way we perceive from our defensive mind the world around us, which affects how we receive. So if I perceive somebody as being against me, and that's the protective brain, it's like, oh, they're against me. There's something that they don't like about me. It becomes much more of a mechanism of now I'm in my defensive brain, which means that I perceive them or others like them in a particular way, which blocks all receptivity and it blocks all connection. There's this guy who used to play with me racquetball at the gym who no longer is there, but he was disliked by probably 80 to 90% of the players there. He is one that likes to give correction and feedback to everybody and carries himself as if he's doing everything right. My guess, I don't know him, and I've never had an interview with him, but my guess based upon my interactions with him and even my sort of seeding some thoughts and words to see his reactions, it's straight up the middle type 1. I even gave him like, hey, do you do this? Do you think about this? And I had some questions like that, and he's, oh yeah, 100%. So probably a type 1, but a very unaware one.
Yeah.
And my perception of him initially was that he was arrogant, someone who thought he was always right, someone who didn't want to really play well with others, and so on. When I started receiving his feedback with a non-defensive approach, and this had to be done by willpower, not by because I actually felt it. I definitely felt the defensiveness.
Sure.
It's that my perception of him dramatically changed. And we all know this, the whole judge a book by its cover. When you get to know somebody, your defense is lower. That's what happens when you have a conversation. You get to know somebody, you hear their story, and then your perception changes. That's critical for everything because it isn't so much the particular, like, I'm struggling to receive feedback. It's also our defensive brain and our perception of what others are intending to do. And it comes all the way to home. So even with my wife, when she gives me some feedback or she says something, I have a trigger and I have a reactive stance that is coming from that defensive brain. Yeah. I no longer see her in all the dimensions of who she is. I now see her as the villain, as the one attacking me.
Right.
So now the connection between us is less, there's a greater space created between the two of us.
Connection and defensiveness can't exist at the same time. And I'm not defending myself against your action, but my perception of the intention of your action.
It's the perception entirely, of your intention.
Yeah, of your action, right.
And we've done a lot on intention and impact, and that's definitely comes into play there for sure.
Yeah.
So, and I think that helps to bridge us to this how others are affected as well by our receptivity or lack thereof. So that's something I'd love to explore a little bit more, the connection to others.
Yeah, I liked how you ended last time we were on that subject of like the effect on others when we do receive. And I was picturing this person in the racquetball court and the body language of people when he says something. And I would guess like heads drop and shake and they would like walk away. It's just like, dude, shut up.
Yeah.
This whole unsolicited advice thing that like does shut people down.
Yeah.
But my guess is you're intentionally moving to receptivity changed the way he interacted with you.
Yes.
I would guess.
It did. And it's not that it's not justified for people to have that reaction or for me to have that reaction. It's not, absolutely. You can justify it.
Totally makes sense.
And it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And on any given day, I've had that similar reaction. I've said stuff and I've walked away and pretty angrily. But that doesn't produce the fruit I want to produce in this world or in my own life. And so when I began receiving from him, and I literally practiced this by total willpower, like, thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you, John. Thank you. I can see the benefit of this. This is helpful. And I'm going to practice that. I'm going to work on that.
Which is what he really wants anyway.
He does.
Right.
And as I did that, my own game improved. And then our connection improved. And he relaxed around me and began to open up a little bit more. There were cracks where he would start to share some things, like some family struggles. And we began to talk more, have more connection. And I started enjoying actually playing with him. And all of the other things that he does that are quirks were like, okay, I can tolerate them. You can continue to walk the path of, hey, you know what? You're an unaware human being and you're having these negative impacts on other people and nobody asked you your opinion and you shouldn't offer it like that. We can do all of that and be justified. But this other path does change not only my perception of the other person, but it changes how they interact then with me.
Yes. It's so funny because as you're telling that, my only reason where I would think to do that and to respond to him differently and to invite him in is so that I have an open door to explain to him how he's affecting other people.
Yeah.
Just to like get it in.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a couple things I like about this story. One of them is just your decision changed your connection and the way you experienced him and the way that your connection was with him through this actual acceptance of where he is right now, as we talked about what real acceptance is. You're not ignoring the patterns, but you're trying to work with them to meet that person where they are.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, really great.
Because it's an awkward bid for connection, I think. I think he's making a very awkward bid for connection.
Oh, that's a great phrase. An awkward bid for connection. Well, I think a lot of like what people are doing are making awkward bids for connection.
Yeah.
Like, see me, like me, see that I have value. And the whole time you're like, dude, you have value if you can just mellow out. That energy is exactly that, an awkward bid for connection.
Yeah.
I love that. Even phrasing it like that, it changes it from, ugh, God, to, aw.
Yeah.
Like internally for me, it just changes my attitude.
It's like, okay, that's a very like human way of trying to make a connection. And so it's funny because the connection started to happen when I would say things like, thank you. I appreciate that. I'd see him just like warm up and it became something meaningful to him. Like, hey, you're having an impact on me. And I appreciate that. It's making a difference. And so that's the thing I think we don't tune into is all the bids for connection that are constant. This was like an epiphany for me. Like everywhere, all the time, people are making bids for connection awkwardly in ways that are very unappealing to some of us. Like that's an awful bid for connection. Like there's awkward and then there's awful. And there's some that is just, wow. There's one guy that his narcissism is off the hook and he just shows up and he interrupts every conversation he can and he hijacks the entire conversation to bend it towards what he's wanting to talk about.
But is that really a bid for connection, even an awful one? Because with something that is in the realm of narcissism, it's like they can never receive, right? Because they can never absorb it. And so even if you did respond favorably, it's not going to sink in. It's just going to pass right through, and it's like a monster that can never be fed.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because at times you can test the theory, right? You could try and see if I change my behavior to him, does it improve the connection? But if it's just one of these things where they just keep taking it and they can't absorb it, and so nothing really changes because they always need more, then that's not really a connection. Then you're just a source that they're feeding off of.
That's
and
right.
I think you have to watch for that.
That's right. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, and I think that's a boundary that we're not saying connection should be made with every last human being on the planet. That is,
yeah, exactly.
There are plenty of people you shouldn't be, doing that with. And that's true. That's one of them that when I see him show up, I say very little.
Yeah. Or if I get that little feeling like, oh, you're just trying to get something from me to make you feel better, I have a really hard time doing something with that. And I don't know, there may be areas in which that's something I need to release and test and see if it changes the nature of the relationship. And there's other times where it's like, yeah, that's not something that would be even healthy to respond to. Because I would even put that into the realm of acceptance. I'm accepting that this is who this person is, but that's also accepting the reality that they have capped our connection by their behavior.
Well, and that's where the question of, are you receiving what I'm giving to you? It could be done in a more personal friendship that you have, or a romantic partnership, family members, people that are close to you. I think you can do that. And I think you can ask that question, are you receiving? Because there's a feeding of the beast that is, like you said, is a never-ending process. Because for all of us, there's a bit of narcissism within the need itself of the type. Because that need itself will never be satiated. Whatever that need is. And there's 9 different types in the Enneagram. All of those needs are never satiated until the person begins the journey, the path. And then the receptivity, which is one of the principles of spirituality, very much taught in the world of the Enneagram. Receptivity is one of the first steps towards growth and towards making peace with that inner hunger. Not trying to shame it away, so you're not trying to starve it, nor are you trying to feed it.
I think we're making a differentiation that I hadn't thought about before, but I do think this is helpful, which is example A, the guy who bothered everyone, but you were able to change the narrative and change the connection, where it transitioned into an exchange. Whereas this other person that you mentioned that's more on the narcissistic end, there's not going to be an exchange. There's only going to be a taking.
That's right. Yeah.
And so it's not really an exchange, a receptivity, a reciprocal thing if it's only always going the one way.
Sure.
And I think that's what we do have to be aware of, because if they're able to exchange, though, okay, we can build on that.
Yeah.
We can build on anything if there's any level of reciprocity, really.
Yeah.
And I think the heart space is always looking for that little bit of reciprocity. Then we can actually start to change the space between us, as we've been talking about through this thing of connection.
Yeah, that's a great point, because you got to be able to see, is the person extending a gift of love towards me?
Yeah.
Are they doing that, but it's different than the way I prefer to receive that love? So I might not see it.
Yeah.
That's a different thing than they are not making any intentional effort to reach out. And I don't believe that we can quickly get there through judgment, through our own discernment, without a lot of work on awareness. Is I've judged wrong more than I've judged right in this space.
Well, the defensiveness we're talking about, it actually keeps the exchange from even being possible.
That's right.
Because I've never put myself out there to even extend something to see if you return it.
Yeah.
Because I've started from the place of defensiveness. So I want to at least experiment with people to see if there can be a reciprocity, if there can be an exchange.
Yeah. So that's the reason why we said in the previous podcast is look for ways that people are loving you, because it opens your aperture. You begin to see things you didn't see before. That's critical. That's absolutely primary to my mind before then you can say, oh, that person genuinely is not extending love in any way. The thing that I don't like about the word narcissism is that it is overused today.
Yeah.
I've had so many clients who have said, oh, this person's narcissistic, that person's narcissistic. Pretty soon everybody around you is a narcissist.
Right.
And then as we coach through some things, we realize you've narrowed your intake for love, that it has to be exactly how you want to be loved, not the way people are loving you in the present moment. And because of that, you've rebuffed their love to the degree that now they've stopped because they can't, there's nothing, you're not taking anything.
Yeah. I just recently heard a psychologist talking about this, where narcissism is being used as like a catch-all for so many different things. But she says it's a very specific set of ingredients that make it up. And she's like, so it's like a cake, but that means that there's flour and there's sugar and there's eggs and there's icing and there's all these different components to make it a cake. But when someone brings eggs and then someone's like, well, that's a narcissist, you're like, that's not a cake. That's just eggs. It's like one of the ingredients, but it really requires all these ingredients to actually do that. And so like a lot of terms these days, we are overusing it. You know, we're overusing these terms like, well, this person was like abusive. It's like, well, they were kind of mean.
Yeah.
Like versus someone who's actually suffered very legitimate abuse. And then some of these terms that we're overusing. And I actually think this is having a major capacity on the way our society is functioning right now to be able to receive, to be able to give, to exchange in connection, because we're overusing really serious words like narcissist, gaslighting, trauma, abuse for things that we're using the same term for everyday stuff in order to, I don't know if it's like legitimize it or express how we feel about it more than like it being an accurate definition of something that has happened to us. And when we use that kind of language, we increase defensiveness, which decreases connection.
That's right.
So it's a symptom of the culture right now that we're overusing some of these terms.
Yeah. And it really is, I think, a symptom of the disease of loneliness and the cycle of loneliness that we create. It's almost like we're creating our own disease of loneliness by how we're looking at the world around us. When we begin to be more receptive, it starts to change everything, changes our perception, changes our sense of connection to the world around us. So these words are not helpful when we're sort of categorizing like that's a person who's a narcissist, that person's always gaslighting me.
Right.
You know, it's not to say that these things don't exist. It's to say that don't judge whether they do or don't. Just ask yourself from a standpoint of results, from a standpoint of fruitfulness in your own life, how is that working? You know, and don't judge it. Just like ask yourself, how's that working?
Yeah.
And what if I were to be a little bit more receptive and less defensive? What could change inside me? Because I think that a person who becomes a sage is a person that is able to see everything, but without reactivity. They're able to see it and recognize, oh, that's a person that can't receive. I'll do what I can in that relationship.
Right.
All compassion, all grace. But my boundaries aren't barriers. They're not like blockades. They're just, okay, this is as far as we can go. And when they're capable of receiving more, great. I will be glad to give more. But I'm not going to empty my resources into a vortex, a black hole.
Right.
I can't do that, you know.
But those are few and far between.
They really are, yeah.
And so if you're running into a ton of people that you're like, all they do is take, I mean, you might need to look a little deeper if that consistent thing is, you know, are you somehow inadvertently seeking these people out, or is there an interpretation thing going on there that may not be entirely accurate?
Yeah. I think we shape each other more than we realize how much 100%. We do. If you're the kind of person who's always giving and you don't like receiving, but then you're frustrated because nobody's giving to you, what are you creating, nurturing, around you relationally.
Yeah.
Let's say person B in your life, you're person A, person B in your life has tried to give to you, but you didn't see it. You don't even think that they have because you couldn't see it. But person B, this often happens in coaching sessions. I'll coach person B, and they'll mention the ways that they've attempted. Person A doesn't even realize that was an act of love. And so then person B says, it's not worth it. It's exhausting. I keep trying. I get rebuffed. So they give up. Well, they shouldn't give up. Right. But do you realize that this is part of the reality that we're creating because we are impacting and affecting each other, either in one direction or another, or, in multiple different directions?
We usually keep it so positive and light, but that's a serious call out. Like, that is a very real thing that we are seeing a lot. And so when we're seeing a pattern that consistently, we have to start asking questions about it. We have to start poking holes at it, because I've seen so many people shrink their world to almost nothing.
Oh yeah. It's just them and maybe one
then
other person.
They complain about being lonely.
Yeah.
Because they can't have relationships because they've narrowed what allows someone to be close to them. Like, I look at kids, and you're friends with someone, they're your best friend because they live down the street and you have time together and you can just run around the neighborhood. Like, it's like so open. It's like whoever's around, like, I watch them. And then you watch kids get older and then they start narrowing, this narrowing process. You're trying to find your people, the people who get you. And I get that. Mm-hmm. But I've seen people kind of continue that pattern. They don't kind of look for people that are similar and then expand and then go back and forth, which allows you to have a wider network of support who are good at a lot of different things. And then so they just narrow until, well, now there's nothing left.
Yeah, well, it's the all or nothing, right? I mean, you're pointing out something that's really important, which is you don't have to have the same level of connection with every single person.
Nope.
But you don't have to not have it. It's like, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. Like, we have total connection and we agree on everything. We like everything the same. We get along perfectly. Well, great. That narrows the pool really, really small now. You've got maybe one or two other people that will be in that circle.
Until they do something.
Until they do something. Until they grow. and then you're in trouble.
Oh, dang.
And I think some circles have this unstated agreement. We will never grow, because we don't want to change because we like what we have.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we've definitely seen that in certain political perspectives, certain faith traditions where it's like, no, we can't expand. Because if we do, somehow my expanding to you is going to come at the cost of who I think I am.
Oh, yeah. There's always that fear of loss of a piece of us. Or
I'll lose my identity, or we will lose a core component of our group identity.
Yes.
If we expand into the connection with people who are not like us or don't agree on this particular thing.
Yeah, and we hide behind the arguments of theology and politics rather than acknowledging the truth, which is we're scared.
Yeah, well, if you believe your cause is righteous, you don't have to question whether or not you're right.
That's right, yeah. You don't have to look inward. Isn't it nice? It's very convenient.
So great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how many of us actually do that when we have a real reaction against someone? We ever stop to go, why am I reacting to this so strongly?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
The default question is, well, what's wrong with them?
Yeah.
There are people on the other side who anytime there's like an exchange, their starting point is what's wrong with me.
Yes.
But we've talked about this even with corporations and everything else, is when so much of this work is about getting outside of the binary of asking the only two questions available to me when something goes wrong is what's wrong with me or what's wrong with them. It's not that simple.
No. And we need to consider that if we have a perspective of there's something wrong here or there's something right, we're bypassing the first step, again, that we've talked about, which is receptivity, acceptance of what is. Again, it's not acquiescence, it's acceptance of what is.
Yeah.
But I want to pivot back to how we talked about the impact that we have, the shaping that we have of each other. And that moves us towards connection or disconnection. One of the things that I've been practicing is, who do I want to be? Not what am I trying to achieve necessarily, or what am I trying to accomplish, but who do I want to be in a relationship with my wife?
Yeah.
Because if we shape each other, then it becomes reactions to reactions. And then it becomes a thing of where it cascades all the way back to years in the past if you've been with a person for a long time, where it's like you're having a reaction to a reaction, they're having a reaction to that reaction, you're having a reaction to that reaction to that reaction. Pretty soon, you're years into reactivity to one another.
Yeah, and the thing you've practiced, you will keep performing, which is that reactive pattern that has been established through practice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And we justify ourselves.
Yep.
It's like, I'm right. So the practice for me has been, who do I want to be, the better version of myself? How do I want our relationship to be? And then try acting according to that value. So for example, I've been practicing like lightheartedness. Now, some might think, well, you're a 7, that comes easy. No, it has not come easy.
Space.
Not in that space at all. That has been the opposite. I've been very reactive, very defensive. So I've been practicing now that for maybe about a year, maybe it's just practicing it and see how it works. And I know my wife has been practicing that as well. And it's interesting how that shapes each other. So if I don't have a reaction that's negative or defensive to something she says, and I make a joke of it, and then I tease her in return, and she makes a joke of it, the thing passes. There's no frustration with each other. It's just all good, right? So
it's
now we move
classic
on.
Pattern interruption.
It's a pattern. Yeah, it is a pattern interruption for sure. Yeah. And then I look at it and I think, well, okay, we just shaped each other in a positive way because we're believing the best about each other's intentions as opposed to, again, judging each other's intentions.
Based on the effect it had on me.
Yep.
Based on things that I don't even know where it came from sometimes.
Oh, yeah. 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 Probably from way, way long ago.
Way back. Yeah.
I'd like to kind of move as this conversation is evolving to how do we encourage the bids for connection around us? This is about connection to other people. How do we encourage those bids? How do we nurture them? Let's pretend we're now moving to, we're seeing the bids for connection from people all around us.
Well, there's the first part is the even seeing it.
Seeing it, yes.
Yeah. Noticing that anytime someone has some toward movement toward you, something that is thoughtful, that is considerate, that is positive in any way, that is affectionate in any way, going like, oh, that's an extension.
Yeah.
Even if it's, I like your phrase, an awkward bid for connection, that even that sometimes is going, I can make them feel less awkward by responding to this.
Yeah.
What is a foundational, transformational attitude that comes up in every single spiritual tradition, meditation practice? It's the thing of gratitude.
Mm-hmm.
And if the starting point with anyone doing anything that is positive towards us as an express gratitude, internally, externally, we are increasing the likelihood that they want to be open to responding to us.
Mm-hmm.
I think gratitude is absolutely essential to connection in every way.
Yeah. Well, it does so much for them as it does for you.
100%.
Yeah. And what we're doing is we're saying we're going to nurture desire to reach out. We're going to nurture that. So what happens if we start doing that all around us? Could you imagine a country filled with people who are recognizing the bids for connection and then nurturing that bid, even if it doesn't scratch our itch?
Yeah.
It's a bid for connection that we might say, which is, I don't, that's not the way I prefer to be connected to.
Yeah.
But I recognize that that's an act of love, and I want to nurture that in that person.
Yeah.
Right? Well, then that person feels empowered. But what feeling is it when someone receives your act of love, your bid for connection? I mean, what does it do for you?
I feel like the body kind of goes, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm less alone. I feel better about that person because I wasn't sure how it was going to be received. Because that's always a thing.
Yeah.
Is how is this going to be received? If I approach my friend, my partner, my kid, however it is, I've tried to do this thing, and how are they going to respond to it? Right? I think of the parents who've got 16, 17-year-olds where they want to connect in some way, and it's just this pulling away energy that's so present at that age because they're trying to individuate. And so we've started having conversations with like this at the stage, this is what happens sometimes in your brain chemistry as you're trying to individuate. So even using those moments to try and create connection through understanding, like, this is what is happening and it's totally normal for you. And like, we're not going to be rejected and we're not going to reject you for something that is a natural process in you. Like, even having those conversations now, I think normalizing is a huge key to a lot of what happens in that space too, because so many people just want to feel like, is there something wrong with me or is there something wrong with you? If I do this, is this going to work? Is it not? And this is something that Abby and I talk about all the time, that normalization is something that de-escalates and makes you feel more connected. Mm-hmm. She tells this story about how when we were dating and she'd start to get really anxious about where's this going or what does this mean, or, or we get in some kind of a tiff or whatever. And I would be like, I think this is totally normal that most couples experience this and we'll work through this. It'll be totally fine. So it was like a de-escalation thing. And I remember it was like a year or so into marriage. This is like three years later or something like that. And she's explaining that to another couple we were sitting with that, I would have these freakouts, but Jim was always so calm. It didn't seem to faze him. He just normalized it for me, which was really helpful. And I was like, no, I was freaking out too. But I believed the higher authenticity, the bigger reality was that it was normal and that we would be fine if we just like acknowledged it. We said, this is fine. And we're going to work through this. So like, even moments of tension were used to create connection by normalizing them.
Yeah. And that's a critical piece. I'm glad you brought that up, of calming the nervous system, your nervous system, their nervous system. Because again, it pulls us out of the defensive, protective brain and puts us into a more positive, creative, connected brain. So if we're responding to the bids for connection and we're actually celebrating them, nurturing them, then I think we can move to this next component, which is how we can articulate our needs for connection. Now, again, this turns at the direction, seems to turn now back towards us, but this is the bridge between us. This is the relational space of like, how do I express my need for connection?
Yeah. And I can already hear some of the heart types, because I had a couple, even in the last week, say to me something along the lines of like, but I shouldn't have to. Like, you really care about me. I shouldn't have to name what I need. In fact, it almost feels like I'm diminishing.
Yeah, it has less value.
It has less value if I have to ask.
Yeah.
Or if I have to name it. So there's some where there's like a part of the resistance to receiving is the fact that I have to ask.
Yeah.
And that was something we've been talking about a lot. It's this resistance to receiving, not being able to receive, not being able to sort of the receptivity component. Sometimes people struggle in the receptivity component, especially heart types, is in this needing to ask thing in the first place.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I'm not a heart type, but I empathize that it is very, very difficult when you see, from your perspective, how obvious it is. It's like, don't you see? I think it's clear to me, and be clear to me what you would need for connection. Except that this is where heart types don't always discover this truth, that even though they think that they see what other people's needs are and that they can meet those, relationally responsible behavior, is that they don't always read accurately what other people need. I remember a heart type in relationship with me thought she knew what I needed. Now, there were certainly many times where she nailed it, but other times it was like, I feel like you're doing this for me so that then I say to you, thank you, you're amazing. Meanwhile, I actually don't want this. I don't have a need for that thing that you're giving to me. And these are not just twos. It sounds like a two thing, but it's not. It's like I've had that from threes and fours. So I don't think that it is natural for any type. I don't think any type has it nailed down that they understand completely how to meet the individual need of their, of other people in relationship to them. I think it's something you have to learn to do. But I do believe you have to articulate your need and take agency of it. To me, this is the act of taking responsibility and agency for your own needs. It's not that you get them met by yourself. It's that you're taking agency by doing things like sometimes meeting them yourself and sometimes asking deliberately, here's the way I prefer to be loved. But to me, it has to come on the heels of acceptance and celebrating what already is happening in the ways that your partner and your family and your friends are loving you. If you don't receive what they're giving to you, then to demand how you want to be loved is once again falls back into that pattern that we're all so used to, which is here's how we prefer being loved. And so we have a particular pattern through which it's like an intake through which we draw love, but it never quite scratches the itch because we're made to receive more love by expanding our intake and receptivity. And when we do, then it starts to land a little bit more. So I do think that asking is good, naming what it is that you prefer, how you prefer being loved, without demand. Ask without demand. And when we ask without demand, what we're saying is that we believe that there's an infinite source of love that is coming to us, mediated oftentimes through other human resources. So our partners, our friends, our family, those are human resources. But I think an act of faith is to say, but I believe that love is universal. And it's not that I have to get this from this one person here.
That's a big one to me. That's a really, really important one to me. I've seen so many people, they get so stressed out in their most intimate relationships because they're asking it to do things that it can't, and that would be much better served by a wider network, some other relationships. And even if your partner was able to do that, if they did it a lot, it would be very draining energetically for them. It would be taxing for them in a way that it may not for someone else who you're close with. I remember my wife actually stopping me once when I was going on a topic, and she's like, here's 3 other people you can go talk to about that.
Oh my gosh.
I was like,
that's funny.
And I was like, you're right. That's fantastic. You're absolutely right. Because it's like, this is exhausting. It's not interesting to me. We put too much in our culture on that one relationship when, man, there's other people who would love to talk about that with us, to celebrate that with us. So I like this idea of asking without demand. I think that's a really, really important part of any relationship is, hey, are you able to show up for me here in this way? And if not, like, that's actually okay too. Because there's other things that can be in the space between us that are really beautiful. Yeah. It doesn't have to be everything. Yeah. And in fact, we're probably going to damage it if we're putting too much in that space. Yeah.
So I hope this is helpful as a starting conversation. I don't think we've covered nearly everything.
Well, the more we get into it, the further I feel like we could go. I could just keep going deeper in it. Yeah. But I like these concise things of understanding, the direction towards us, the receptivity and the connection with self. So actually being honest with yourself, the connection through others, like increasing our receptivity, noticing bids for connections, like understanding that sending and receiving dynamic that's going on, and this connecting to others by trying to meet their needs, by even asking them to ask, which I think is a really great habit, which is, I'm going to ask you to ask me for what you need, which is great. All of this is, I feel like, a concise, good little component. And then I feel like we're going to have more conversations on the back end of these 3 episodes that are going to, go in another level. But I love it. I think these are really helpful things to think about. These are things that we are obviously very passionate about because we've seen the effect it has on people's overall sense of wellness, their sense of connection, their connection to themselves, the connection with the relationships around them, the capacity to even engage in new relationships and a wider network. And I think when we lean into that, we do co-create ourselves more into the person that we respect and want to be. Because you were talking about that, and I want to end with that, highlighting that, which is this: who do you want to be? Mm-hmm. And when I lean into that, that's also going to impact the decisions I make and who I spend time with and how I spend time with them. Because ultimately, identity is not discovered or created. It is a combination of both.
It is, yeah.
There's a discovery process to it. I am exploring to find just as much as that. I'm not just looking. I'm not just looking to find it. I am creating. And I consider those people who are close to me as co-creators of my identity, my story, my history, and who I am becoming. Mm. And all of these people get to speak into my becoming. And I want to welcome voices into that. I don't want to limit it. Because otherwise I will actually limit who I can be.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you so much for listening. And I want to do this reading as a conclusion. But before I conclude with our benediction, or whatever you want to call it, make sure you're subscribed. We have a new panel season coming out soon, which is, we think, our best to date. It's so good about this topic of connection and how each of the types do that. You can also follow us on Instagram, just Art of Growth. And a reminder, that's the last week to sign up for this round of certification. And if you're new to the Enneagram, you can take a free Enneagram test at theartofgrowth.org. But for now, my friends, may you be nourished in the good ground of belonging. May you be planted among strong trees near fresh water. May you be steady, surrounded by stable ground and deep roots. And in that place of belonging, may you witness your becoming. May you be guarded from the full force of gale winds and emerge from the strength of a formed foundation. As the seasons and the settings shape you, may you come into the promise that was in the seed of you at the dawn of time. And as you reach into the light of the fullness of your becoming, may you create a place of belonging for others to thrive in the shadow of the shelter you have become. Be kind to all and warm to many, but be cautious who you invite into the co-creating space of intimate friendship. We make friends, and as friends, we make each other. Friends are formational. They help forge our future. So choose these co-creators well. Grace and growth, my friends.